Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master, Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Lúthien. Welcome to Window on the West, where we explore all the ages of Tolkien's Middle-earth, with your hosts, Jonathan Watson, Michael Grumbine, and Dan Coates.
Welcome to episode 25 of Window on the West. My name is Jonathan Watson, one of the co-hosts here, and you might notice that we are one leg short of our three-legged stool, whereas Dan Coates is unavailable today, and so Michael and I are here. And we decided instead of jumping 100% completely into of Beren and Lúthien, which is sort of the ultimate story Tolkien wrote, one of the original stories in Middle-earth that he wrote. We're going to actually give a little bit of an intro, talk a little bit about it, and this will be a little bit of a shorter episode because of that.
Well, as anyone who listens to our episodes knows, it's really Dan that makes our episodes so long. So this will be super short.
Totally Dan.
Yeah.
So anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with a little bit of a quote, right? Oh, and we're going to have an extended podcast. We're going to talk a couple questions from our patrons, including kind of talking about, remind me, Michael, what was that quote? Let me grab it as we look at it. The theme of joy, particularly as Tolkien quotes it in the opening, which we'll look at too, but we're going to kind of go in depth in that in our extended podcast as well. And you can get that at theonering.com/patron. It's $4 a month, but free for the first month because we're very, very generous here.
We are.
All right. So
very generous. So
what we're going to do is I'm going to start with a quote from letter 155 that Tolkien wrote when he was talking to, I think it was to Houghton Mifflin, the publisher, about where and what the inception of Middle-earth came from. So this is what he wrote. This business began so far back that it might be said to have begun at birth. Somewhere about 6 years old, I tried to write some verse on a dragon about which I now remember nothing, except that it contained the expression a green great dragon, and I remained puzzled for a very long time at being told that this should be great green. But like his philology started so early. I love that.
And his philology is apparently inflicted on him by others because he says he remembers being told.
Yeah. So his entire life is the search for why is it great green instead of green great?
See, that would have been just awesome if he had named the inn in the Shire the Green Great Dragon Inn.
That's right. No green dragon, just the green great dragon. That would have been perfect. Maybe that's why he called it the green dragon. All right.
I'm sure it is.
So, next line. But the mythology and associated languages first began to take shape during the 1914 to 1918 war. The fall of Gondolin, which we haven't read through yet here in the Silmarillion, but we will be getting to in the next few, probably about a month and a half away. The fall of Gondolin and the birth of Arundel was written in hospital and on leave after surviving the Battle of the Somme in 1916. The kernel of the mythology, the matter of Luthien, Tinuviel, and Beren, arose from a small woodland glade filled with hemlocks or other white umbellifers. So, here, let me finish this. Or other white umbellifers. Umbellifer is a kind of plant. Near Roos on the Holderness Peninsula, to which I occasionally went when free from regimental duties while in the Humber garrison in 1918. In another letter, he mentions it's 1917, but here he does say that it's 1918. So he mentions the hemlocks, and real fast. So hemlocks, for me, for instance, in particular, hemlock, I always thought of as an evergreen tree. It's a type of coniferous evergreen tree. But here, hemlock actually refers to this plant down here, which is, I guess, referred to as like more colloquially as cow parsley. I've seen, but this is, I think, it mentions it as like somewhere he mentions it as the white froth of the ground, and this is what it was. And so this is essentially from the place where near Roos, a glade of hemlocks, right here, where all this stuff along the ground that they would walk hand in hand through. He and Edith Marie. I don't remember her maiden name right now.
Brat,
that's right. So they would walk through here, and this is where he got the inception for Luthien. And it started early, and then it ended at the end. Right? It wasn't just something that he carried through a brief time in his life. To the very end of his wife's and his life, the story of Beren and Lúthien was woven into who they were. And so that's why a lot of we it's simply regarded the central story in all of Middle Earth. It's the most important story, I would say, in all of Middle Earth. And then we have this other quote. Do you have that, Michael? The other one? Yeah. Why don't you read that one? Which is right after. It's from July 11th, 1972, after Edith died, and this is what Tolkien wrote.
Yes. So this is in a letter which concerns what's going to be on their gravestone. And so he mentions in the letter that he begins with, she was and knew she was my Luthien. And he says the inscription should be her name, her full name, Edith Mary Tolkien, with the years 1889 to 1971, and then the word Luthien underneath it, which is exactly what happened. And I think Jonathan has a picture of that up now. And then the common grave, the double grave with him being buried after he died a couple of years later, in the same place. And so, as Jonathan mentioned, this is a seed of his mythology, and for Tolkien, mythology is more real and more accessible than other forms of literature. And it isn't just a youthful flight of imagination that makes him create the story, but he carries it with him to the end. It is the seed, and more than the seed. I think we'll talk about this more next week when Dan's here with us. But as we go through the details of the story. The tale of Beren and Lúthien, in what I suppose you could consider its final form in the Silmarillion, is really the glue that binds together his mythology, the mythology of the Valar, the creation of the world, the Valar and the Elves, together with, literally, because it's a tale of love between elf and man. It binds together the immortal and the mortal sides of his world, and it is the center of everything. It's the quintessential love story, although it's far deeper than, dare I say it, than a story like Romeo and Juliet. So I just compared him to the Bard. Yes, I did.
And remember that the essay by C.S. Lewis about how to make something even more real, it's like you dip reality into story, and that's a little bit what's happening right here too, right? The story was more real, and so it made his reality more real because it took on a shape that the simple fairness of our world does not hold.
That's right. And it's just, to call it it's more than the narrative center of his tale. It is in fact sort of the way his soul moved. There's another quote I love about that from that same letter, the July 11th, 1972 letter to his son. And he says, where forever, especially when alone, we still met in the woodland glade. This is the hemlock glade that Jonathan spoke about earlier. We still met in the woodland glade and went hand in hand many times to escape the shadow of imminent death before our last parting. So this is the shadow of imminent death, of course, of World War I that he had to return to over and over again. So it really is. She is the thing that drew him back. And when we read the tale, when I say the thing that drew him back, what I meant was back to the real, back to beauty, back to joy, back to the life that was the opposite of the death and destruction that he viewed, and that is, and he would say, is in fact a common tale across all peoples and all times, which is the shadow of death and and beauty and joy drawing you back. And so I'm really looking forward to our discussion next week when Dan's able to join us. And I think we're going to do it over 2 weeks, right? We're going to split the tale.
2 or 3.
Or maybe 3.
Weeks, yeah. Because I think
much to talk about.
And otherwise, you guys would get bored. We'd be going on for like 3 hours probably. And we've got to sleep once we record these too. So I would for sure subscribe so that you hear all 3 episodes. I think before we jump into the whole thing next week, I think we can go ahead and read the first paragraph of Beren and Lúthien, because I think it talks a lot about that joy that you talk about, right? The contrast, the joy, that despite all the death and destruction, and evil in the world, the punctuations of joy are really what are remembered. Maybe that's the best way of putting it. Let's read it. Let me go ahead and do that. Among the tales of sorrow and of ruin that come down to us from the darkness of those days, there are yet some in which amid weeping there is joy, and under the shadow of death, light that endures. And of these histories, most fair still in the ears of the elves is the tale of Beren and Lúthien. Of their lives was made the Lay of Leithian, release from bondage, which is the longest, save one of the songs concerning the world of old. But here the tale is told in fewer words and without song. And it's that line, there are yet some in which amid weeping there is joy, and under the shadow of death, light that endures. I think, that encompasses most of the Silmarillion too.
I agree.
But even more so in here when you read through the whole story and the shadows that are cast over everything that happens. In the first section we'll go through, we'll see how, the shadow of Fëanor is wide and dark, and it casts itself on those who didn't even go to Valinor, as we'll see.
Right.
After.
Right, exactly. And although I do have to chuckle at that last line, but here the tale is told in fewer words and without song. Right. There is no such thing as a Tolkien chapter of anything that does not have song in it, as we will see. There is plenty of song in this chapter, but I understand what they're saying. He's saying, of course, it's not told in verse, but
it's not a lay. Yeah. Next week, I would really encourage you read through the first third of Beren and Lúthien, and I will tell you exactly where we'll end. And that is at the second major break after, as Michael was saying, a bit of song in the first chapter. For me, it's about page 201 in my copy of the Silmarillion. Here it ends with a line, stop at this line. From time to time, they saw two eyes kindled in the dark, and a werewolf devoured one of the companions, but none betrayed their lord. So go to that point, stop there. And I'll throw a couple links about Beren and Lúthien here. There's images that we'll put in here about, we'll throw in that image of the gravestone, because you can see, as we said last week, the word Luthien on the gravestone means more than anything else he could say. So I want to end with this line here where he talks about Edith and what happened to the story as he lives on and his wife passed away. I never called Edith Luthien, but she was the source of the story that in time became the chief part of the Silmarillion. It was first conceived in a small woodland glade filmed with hemlocks at Roos in Yorkshire, where I was for a brief time in command of an outpost of the Humber garrison in 1917, and she was able to live with me for a while. In those days, her hair was raven, her skin clear, her eyes brighter than you have seen them, and she could sing and dance. But the story has gone crooked, and I am left, and I cannot plead before the inexorable Mandos. I love how he ends that. But the story has gone crooked, and I am left, and I cannot plead before the inexorable Mandos. Even in, he weaves his own stories into his conversations with his son, who of course was very involved in a lot of this, but the whole idea, he can say more by saying, I cannot plead before the inexorable Mandos. It speaks of his loss, his grief, that there's nothing more that he can do. And he puts it into a metaphor of how his stories, how his legendarium was built. And I think it says more to those of us who've read the Silmarillion and who know about the halls of Mandos and who know about what that means, that once there, no one returns except for, we'll get there. So anyway, we'll see you next week as we get into the first third of Beren and Lúthien. And if you want to join us for our extended podcast, make sure you go to theonering.com/patron. You can download it there into any podcast app. There are directions. Once you get there, just requires the username and password. Free for the first month and $4 for a month after that. And join us in our Discord chat where we are talking about Beren and Lúthien and all the special things that we see in that and the new things and the revelations. And I will say some of my favorite lines in the whole Silmarillion are coming up in this first third that we're going to read, and I can't wait to get to them next week.
We will be full of quotes.
Too many.
And we probably will go 3 episodes, just to be honest.
Yes, for sure. All right, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us in this short but sweet episode of Window on the
Bye,
West.
all.